Welcome to Kitchen Table Conversations, a series of short and shareable conversation starters for those of us who have or love and support people with a complicated and beautiful brain. Here's your host, Angela Geddes.
Hi, everyone, and welcome to another edition of Kitchen Table Conversations. Once again, I'm just so glad that you've decided to tune in today. Today, I think I'm going to focus once again on some of the risks associated with alcohol use in our culture. And I think that it's a really, really complicated conversation, and I am very aware of how the way we speak about alcohol use in general, the way we speak about mental health conditions, the way we speak about fetal alcohol spectrum disorder in particular, bears weight, and it has the potential to either increase the stigmas associated with these conditions, or we can do our part to decrease the stigma. But the bottom line is there is a stigma attached to there continues to be a stigma attached to mental health conditions, and in particular, the role that alcohol plays. But I'm here to say that we all need to really take a good look at this and figure out what we can do to normalize some of these conversations. We are in a mental health crisis. Our healthcare system is struggling right now to meet the needs. Our mental health system is really struggling to meet the needs, and I see the implications of that every single day in my practice. And we cannot ignore the fact that prenatal alcohol exposures not only can lead to fetal alcohol spectrum disorder, which is the most prevalent developmental disorder, but it can also lead to other conditions like an increased risk of depression and anxiety and attention difficulties and sensory processing difficulties. We don't necessarily have to meet criteria for fetal alcohol spectrum disorder in order to be impacted by prenatal alcohol exposure. And I think that's a really, really important message, because when we consider that alcohol is a toxin, it goes directly to the brain, it goes directly through the entire body, through the placenta, and affects cell development and interferes with typical infant or fetal development. If we continue to consume alcohol while breastfeeding, for example, these things are real. And we need to have these kinds of normal conversations, because I am still dumbfounded with amount of misinformation offered from family members, from friends, from physicians, from social workers, from nurses. I just had somebody in my office this week saying that the pediatrician absolutely dismissed fetal alcohol spectrum disorder as being any kind of consideration because there were no facial features. And the pediatrician outwardly went as far as to say that the problems that we're experiencing in the home and in the school are a direct result of poor parenting strategies. And I can't tell you how many parents come into my office perplexed, confused, beat up, really feeling judged and like they are the wrong fit for these kids, whether they're biological or foster or adopted families. Really, really curious as to why their typical parenting strategies and their enormous efforts are in many cases falling flat. So I think that, again, my goal in this podcast is to bring conversations back home to our kitchen table. And I can honestly tell you, I can't think of a more important one. Now, I'm going to recognize my own bias in all of this. Obviously, I think many of you may already know this, but the very first little person I ever supported in a professional capacity had a diagnosable condition called fetal alcohol syndrome. And as I've often said, the bad news was that this little fella was exposed to a significant amount of alcohol early enough and throughout the pregnancy that left him visibly, noticeably impacted. So he had facial features. His growth was restricted. This was a full body experience. And again, the bad news was he was exposed to a significant amount of alcohol. The good news was that he was exposed to enough alcohol that, again, it made it obvious so that everybody in his circle wrapped around him and made expectations realistic, made accommodations and modifications throughout all areas of his life so that he could live his best life and reach his potential. And I think everybody wants that for our kids or our family members or our community members. But when people look like everyone else, whatever that may be, and don't have any visible or obvious signs of a hidden condition of any sort, then the expectations are often way too high. The inconsistent performance and the puzzling behaviors become really hard to understand and hard to manage. And society has a tendency to blame parents and blame the individuals who are struggling as if this is willful decision making and a result of just a whole bunch of bad decisions and people who aren't meeting the mark in terms of, what society expects of them as individuals and certainly of parents and caregivers. I'm astounded that this pediatrician would have the nerve to say to a family that these problems are a result of your poor parenting, not really having a clue what goes on behind closed doors. So I think that, I see this all the time. I see schools being very judgmental. I see Facebook groups where parents are of a particular school, for example, are outing kids by talking about specific events, maybe not mentioning the names, but being very clear that, what happened on Tuesday at 3:00, for example, when the school had to be shut down or when a classroom was evacuated. It's not long figuring out who these people are. And these parents and these kids have access to this social media, and it can be really, really devastating. So again, I'm circling around here because I want to demonstrate the impact on individuals and family members, and I want to focus on the fact that this can be prevented with the right information. And sometimes I think we're so busy worrying about offending people and not wanting to have these tough conversations that we fail to just give people the information that they actually need in order to make informed decisions. So on the other side of this too, I think it's really important to note that I know of service providers who do not do enough in terms of having good conversations around the risks associated with alcohol use in pregnancy. I know that I worked for an organization where I wanted to highlight that the research was clear that midwives were feeling less informed than what they should be and not really aware of some of these risks and were giving out wrong information. And there's literature out there to share this. But there was resistance within the organization to share this information because a member of our team happened to be among other things, a midwife, and worried that there would be some pushback from the midwife community, feeling like we were centering them out or blaming them for some of this misinformation. But to me, as a professional, I only know what I know, and I don't know what I don't know yet. But I am aware that there's a lot that I don't know, which can be different for everyone. And I think that if somebody presents me with some new information, I'm sorry that I've provided misinformation in the past, but I did my best based on what I understood the evidence to tell me and best practice. And we can say that with surety because what I've learned about alcohol exposure in pregnancy over the years has shifted. It has changed. When I first started learning about this, I felt like it was a lot of alcohol that needed to happen before we resulted with anything, developmental in nature or neurological in nature. We understood that those early weeks prior to the awareness of pregnancy, the pregnancy would naturally terminate if it was impacted by enough alcohol to do any damage. But we know that's different now. We know that facial features only happen during, a really, really small window, something between day 18 and 21 following conception, which is oftentimes before people are even aware of the pregnancy. So a weekend away with the girls, for example, how many times do we see stagettes, not just an evening anymore, but a whole weekend? So if that was timed properly and there was an unplanned pregnancy, and I'm using properly in air quotes here, because if it's timed, unfortunately, to fit that developmental stage, then that's where we're talking about facial features can be formed and significant impact on the pregnancy could take place if we binge drink, which is 3 to 5 drinks, depending on how big you pour that glass of wine, for example. That changes things dramatically. 2 9-ounce glasses of wine essentially are 4 glasses, 4 standard drinks. So you're already, well on your way to a binge drink and having significant implications on the pregnancy. So again, we want to have these normal conversations, but I think we also have to understand that the prevention efforts that we're doing so far are not working, because actually drinking during pregnancy is on the rise. And I think many of you will be surprised at that, and I hope you are. But at the same time, I don't think, when you consider the culture that we live in, in Canada, the most recent research indicates that it's estimated that 10 to 15% of pregnancies are currently being alcohol exposed. Now, we have other countries where alcohol is even more part of the culture that, we can't deny that reality. So France, for example, wine drinking is a part of a daily activity, and it's something that's really honored there. When you talk about Ireland, for example, a lot of the social interactions take place in their pubs, and alcohol is a big part of that. So in those countries, we're talking 25% of pregnancies being exposed. In Ireland, it's closer to 45% of pregnancies being exposed. So check out my website for more specific details on some of these statistics. But the bottom line is, we can all attest to, many women in childbearing years, many people in childbearing years consume alcohol. And with over 50% of pregnancies being unplanned, there are a significant number of pregnancies that are exposed to alcohol unbeknownst to the parents-to-be. So the bottom line is, there is no safe amount, there's no safe type, and there's no safe time. So if more people are aware of that, then maybe we can all work together to reduce unplanned pregnancies, so that if people do want to drink socially, it's one thing to drink socially and impact your own health. It's another thing to live with the idea that you may have impacted another. And I think that's the piece that gets missed out of a lot of our conversations around reducing the stigma and not perpetuating blame and shame. And I'm here to say that I don't believe anybody does this on purpose. I really don't. But I also hear from people who live with the impacts of prenatal alcohol exposure that say, hey, if they're ignoring the evidence, if physicians are ignoring the evidence and not giving this information, for example, if social workers are not considering the role of alcohol and the potential for a neurodevelopmental condition, and we're still supporting families as if this is a parenting or an attachment issue, then we are doing more harm than good, and there should be consequence for that. And I believe it. There really should. I think that, I support parents, biological parents, who live with the idea that harm was done. And now we're working through it. I do not believe that ongoing guilt and blame and shame is helpful for anyone. All we can do with our past is learn from it and move forward and be part of solutions. But when I am, as a social worker, listening to moms crying and telling me how their physician told them that a glass of wine a day was okay, and then they end up delivering a baby with floppy baby syndrome and long-standing impacts because of that decision to have a drink. That's painful. That's painful to watch, and it's undeniable. When I have another mom that says, I consulted with some of my friends who were pediatric nurse practitioners, pediatric neurologists, who say to me that, you're late enough in the pregnancy now that the occasional drink of wine wouldn't do any harm. And now we're talking about people who are worrying, like to a really significant degree, worrying about what those decisions might mean for the development of their children. So again, I'm here to say that our current prevention efforts are not working. I believe they're not working because nobody sees, or very few people see, their social drinking as being concerning or alarming at all. So when we talk about fetal alcohol spectrum disorder, we assume that that's for people who are, I just heard it the other day when somebody talked about it. It was in my own social circle where somebody was talking about, have you ever considered maybe alcohol use prior to the pregnancy being confirmed, that kind of thing? And no, like they weren't alcoholics. Well, I'm here to say that it does not take an alcoholic to create the environment for babies to be interfered with while they're developing. So we have to, again, normalize these conversations, do our best to challenge some of the messaging that's out there, and work together to be part of the solution. And I really believe that means bringing this back to your own kitchen tables. And I have said this publicly before. Again, we only know what we know. When my first nephew was born in the London hospital here in Ontario, the nurses brought beer to the rooms for the mom to drink, in thinking that was going to help with milk production and letdown immediately after the baby was born. So we've learned a lot. When I was having babies, I didn't think those early weeks mattered either. So, thankfully, I wasn't somebody who consumed a lot of alcohol back then. But a little bit of alcohol could have made a difference to an unplanned pregnancy. And although none of my children have fetal alcohol spectrum disorder, I am acutely aware that could have been me. And so there is no judgment, there is no blame, there is no room for shame in all of this, but there is lots of room for conversations. So check out my website and my social media, Instagram and Facebook posts to see whether or not there's something there that you might want to consider sharing. I often wonder why some of the messaging around this issue does not go viral, because I really believe that we could change the landscape in 10 years if we just really focus on preventing all of the impacts of prenatal alcohol exposure. With many thanks, Angela.